It was supposed to be a night of celebration. 15 years as a firefighter. Mason had earned every one of those years with sweat, grit, and more close calls than he cared to remember. His colleagues, his friends, and most importantly, his wife, Celeste, were all here at the bar to toast him, to recognize him, to cheer him on. But Mason couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, not just with the night, but with Celeste. He scanned the room, a warm, crowded buzz of laughter and clinking glasses. The familiar scent of whiskey and cologne filled the air, but it wasn't enough to drown out the sense of unease that sat like a heavy weight on his chest. Celeste stood beside him, smiling at him with a glass of champagne raised in her hand. Her smile, bright and perfect, didn't quite reach her eyes. She always had the kind of smile that lit up a room, but tonight it seemed like an effort. The kind of smile someone gives to a stranger when they need to be polite. Not the kind of smile she'd give him after a long day at home, when she was still the woman he'd fallen in love with. Something in her demeanor was wrong. She glanced at him briefly, her eyes darting away almost immediately. Her smile faltered before she turned to chat with one of his co-workers, clearly distracted, as if forcing the conversation. He couldn't put his finger on it, but Mason knew. He knew her too well. The soft hum of conversation around them faded into background noise as Mason's thoughts turned inward. He watched Celeste closely as she sipped her drink. She was always charming in social settings, but tonight, her charm felt forced, like she was reading from a script. There was a disconnect in her gaze. Her laugh, a little too loud, didn't sound like her own. Mason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, taking a sip from his own drink, the burn of bourbon not enough to drown his growing suspicion. He tried to focus on the conversation happening around him, tried to focus on the congratulations from his friends, but his mind kept drifting back to Celeste. What the hell was going on? "Hey Mason, you all right?" Jeff, a younger guy from the station, slapped him on the back. "You've been staring at Celeste for like 10 minutes. Mason blinked, snapping out of his thoughts. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, you know?" Jeff raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. He nodded and wandered off to chat with the others, leaving Mason alone with his thoughts. Mason glanced over at Celeste again. She was laughing now, her head tilted back as she shared a joke with a group of her friends. But her eyes, those eyes that had always been his anchor, felt distant. Empty even. His heart raced as a thought crossed his mind. Was she seeing someone else? The idea hit him like a punch to the gut. Number? No, it couldn't be. They'd been together for so long. They'd built a life together, a family. But the more he watched her tonight, the more the seed of doubt grew in his mind. He stood abruptly, excusing himself from the group. He needed air, needed to clear his head. As he walked toward the men's room, his mind kept racing, trying to figure out if there was a legitimate reason to feel like this, or if he was just being paranoid. He stepped into the bathroom, the cool tiles underfoot doing nothing to calm the burning suspicion in his gut. His reflection in the mirror stared back at him, eyes wide, face flushed with confusion. Was he overthinking this? Was he just being insecure? He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head, trying to push the thoughts away. "Just collect yourself, Mason. This is ridiculous." The door to the bathroom creaked open, and Mason turned, surprised to see a woman standing in the doorway. She looked familiar, Stacy, one of the neighbors, but there was something urgent in her eyes. Something about her presence, something in the air made Mason tense. "Hey Mason," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "We need to talk." Mason blinked. "What's going on?" "I don't have a lot of time," she said, stepping inside, looking over her shoulder nervously. "Listen to me. You need to stop drinking whatever Celeste gave you. Don't drink it." His brow furrowed. "What? What are you talking about?" "She's messing with your drinks. I saw her, Mason. She's been slipping something in your glasses tonight." Mason froze, the words sinking into his brain like a weight. "What the hell are you saying?" "Your wife," Stacy said, leaning in closer. "She's been seeing someone else. Garrett. You need to watch her. I'm just warning you. Don't drink anything she gives you from now on." Mason's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, his body went cold. He couldn't even process the words she was saying. "Wait, Garrett? What are you talking about?" He shook his head, backing away. "This doesn't make any sense." "I know it's hard to hear," Stacy continued, "but you need to pay attention. It's not just her being distant. She's been seeing Garrett behind your back. I'm not lying, Mason. Just keep an eye on her." Before he could respond, Stacy turned and quickly left the bathroom, her heels clicking against the tile. Mason stood there, rooted to the spot, his head spinning. Was this true? Was she really having an affair? His eyes fell to the drink in his hand, the same one Celeste had handed him earlier, the same one she had subtly pushed toward him as she made her way across the room with that forced smile. His mind reeled. He couldn't even think straight. What was going on? What should he do? Mason took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't confront her yet, not without more proof, but something told him Stacy wasn't lying. That cold, tight feeling in his chest told him it was true. He glanced at his phone. If he was going to figure this out, he needed to watch Celeste, keep track of everything. He wasn't going to let her manipulate him. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but one thing was clear. His marriage was about to change forever. Mason's thoughts were a mess. His mind couldn't stop racing, the words from Stacy repeating over and over in his head. "She's messing with your drinks. I saw her. She's been slipping something in your glasses tonight." He could barely process it, yet the warning had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter, nagging him, making his stomach turn with unease. He needed to shake it off, tell himself she was just some strange woman with a wild story. But that wouldn't be easy, not when it was about Celeste. He glanced at the bathroom door, then at the reflection in the mirror. His face was pale, a tightness in his chest making it hard to breathe. What did Stacy mean by slipping something in your drinks? It sounded crazy, but why had she come to him? Why had she warned him at all? The questions began to pile up, each one more insistent than the last. Shaking his head, he steadied himself. No, this had to be some kind of joke. There had to be a reasonable explanation, but he couldn't just ignore it. After a few more deep breaths, he left the bathroom and headed back to the bar, his feet dragging as the weight of his thoughts followed him. When he returned, Celeste was standing by the drink table, chatting with a few of his coworkers. Her eyes flickered over to him for just a moment, and she smiled that same tight smile. He could still see the lack of warmth in it. It was just like before, like she was going through the motions. She was pretending, and Mason wasn't sure why. Taking a deep breath, he reached for his drink, then paused. Stacy's warning echoed in his mind. He watched Celeste take a sip from her own glass. Could it be true? Could she really be tampering with his drink? He couldn't be sure, not without more evidence. Then an idea hit him. He could test it. He swapped his glass with Celeste's without her noticing, sitting down on a stool across the bar and watching her carefully. She didn't react immediately, laughing at something one of the guys had said, but Mason's eyes never left her. She took another sip, and for a moment, nothing seemed out of place. But then her posture changed. It was subtle at first, like she had just lost a little of her usual poise. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and she seemed to blink more often, as though trying to focus on something just out of reach. Mason frowned, his mind racing. Was it possible? He leaned back, pretending to sip from his own glass, but his eyes never strayed from Celeste. He watched her carefully as she leaned closer to Jeff and seemed to struggle to hold a conversation. Her words became slower, more hesitant, her laugh hollow. It was like she was slipping away. Her eyes darted around the room, a faint flush creeping onto her cheeks. Mason felt a pang of discomfort settle deep in his chest. This was no accident. Something was wrong. He made sure to stay quiet, observing everything from a distance. This wasn't the woman he'd married, not the woman who had always been so sharp, so in control. This was a version of Celeste he barely recognized. She wasn't intoxicated in the way someone would be if they had had a few too many drinks. No, this was something else, something more calculated, like a slow fade into something darker. Mason stood up, ready to make his move, when Celeste suddenly swayed, grabbing onto the edge of the bar for balance. The color drained from her face, and she quickly straightened, smiling at the group as though nothing had happened. But Mason had seen it. She was impaired, and the drink, that had to be the cause. He couldn't wait any longer. With one last glance at Celeste, he made his way to the bartender. "Can I get a water?" he asked, his voice firm. The bartender nodded, handing him a glass. Mason's fingers tightened around it as he thought about what he had just witnessed. It was happening. Whatever had been going on, it was real. Now, he had to figure out what to do next. Mason couldn't keep his eyes off Celeste. Every sip of her drink seemed to add to the growing unease inside him. Her movements were slower now, her posture slack, and her smile, when it came, was hollow. She reached for her glass again, but this time, her hand wavered slightly before she steadied herself. Mason's heart rate quickened. Was it possible? Could she actually be drunk, or was this something else entirely? He leaned against the bar, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place. Something about this night didn't feel right. Celeste's behavior, her forced charm, the cryptic warning from Stacy. None of it made sense, but it all seemed to point to one thing. There was something she was hiding. Something big. As Mason stared at her from across the room, Celeste staggered slightly, her laughter a little too loud and a little too high-pitched. She caught herself on the edge of the table, shooting a nervous glance around as if checking to see if anyone had noticed. It was the first real sign that something was very wrong. "Celeste, you okay?" Mason called out, his voice feigning concern. "Oh, I'm fine," she replied quickly, waving him off with a shaky hand, her words just a little too slurred. Just, a little lightheaded. She forced a laugh, but it came out as a nervous cough. Mason didn't buy it. She was acting erratically. He could see the subtle signs of her growing disorientation. It wasn't just the alcohol. Something else was going on. Something that made him feel like he was watching her unravel in real time. Across the room, Garrett, Celeste's friend, had noticed the change too. He made his way toward her, a concerned frown etched across his face. "Celeste, you sure you're all right?" Garrett asked, his tone soft, like he was trying to keep things under wraps. She waved him off, laughing a little too loudly again. "Yeah, just fine, Garrett. Just need a moment to—" Mason couldn't take it anymore. His suspicions were no longer just doubts. They were facts. Celeste wasn't acting like herself. There was something more going on, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He stepped up to her and gently placed a hand on her arm. "Why don't you sit down for a minute?" he suggested, his voice calm and soothing, pretending to be the concerned husband, trying not to show his growing anxiety. Celeste blinked up at him, eyes unfocused, before she let out another nervous laugh. "I'm fine, Mason, really." "You're not," he replied softly, his gaze hardening. "You've been acting strange all night. Come on, let's sit down." As they made their way to a quiet corner of the bar, Garrett lingered behind, still eyeing them with a subtle sense of unease. Mason made a mental note of it. The way Garrett looked at them now didn't sit right. It was like he knew more than he was letting on. But Mason didn't care about Garrett right now. He was focused on Celeste. They sat at the edge of the bar, the sound of the celebration humming in the background. Mason kept his eyes trained on Celeste, watching her every move. Her head drooped slightly as she stared down at her drink, her lips twitching as if she were fighting to stay alert. "Mason," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I'm fine. Really." Her words felt empty, hollow. Mason's suspicion grew. "Let me get you some water," he said, standing up. But before he could leave, Celeste grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "No," she said urgently, her voice low, almost desperate. "Please, Mason, don't. Just stay with me." Her eyes were wide, filled with something he couldn't quite place. Fear? Guilt? Mason's pulse quickened. He'd seen this before, the desperation in her eyes. This wasn't about being lightheaded or needing a drink. This was something else, something far darker. He nodded slowly, deciding to stay in the moment and keep pretending. But his mind was already calculating his next move. He had to be sure. He couldn't just keep wondering what was happening. He needed answers. "I'll stay," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "But you've got to tell me what's going on. What's really going on?" Celeste looked at him, her face pale, her lips trembling. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to tell him everything. The weight of the truth seemed to hang in the air between them. But instead, she just shook her head. I can't, Mason," she whispered, her voice shaking. Something in Mason snapped. He wasn't going to wait anymore. He needed the truth. And he was going to get it. He looked across the room at Garrett. The suspicion in his gut had turned into something solid, something real. There was more here than Celeste was letting on, and he was going to find out what. When Mason turned back to her, his voice was colder, harder than before. "If you won't tell me, I'll find out on my own." As he walked away to grab a drink for himself, Mason pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his cousin Dean. "Keep an eye on Celeste and Garrett. I need everything you can get." The next steps were clear. He couldn't afford to wait. The truth was coming, one way or another. Mason's heart pounded as he sat in his dimly lit living room, his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. His cousin Dean had delivered the footage he had requested, an undeniable trail of evidence. The video played out in silence, its cruel clarity shattering Mason's world with each passing second. There they were, Celeste and Garrett. The same Garrett who had laughed beside him at the bar just hours earlier. The same Garrett who had pretended to be his friend. Mason's jaw clenched as he watched them together at the private villa, the place where their secret meetings had occurred. In the footage, they looked so natural. Too natural. They stood too close, their body language too intimate. Celeste laughed at something Garrett said, her hand resting on his shoulder, her smile so genuine, so unguarded. That wasn't the woman Mason knew. That was the woman she'd become in the arms of someone else. As the video played, Mason's mind raced. It was real. Every single doubt, every whispered suspicion that had been building over the past few days, all of it was confirmed. Celeste was having an affair with Garrett. Mason paused the video, staring at the frozen image of the two of them. The room around him seemed to grow colder, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on his chest like a vice. His hands shook as he ran a hand through his hair, the full impact of what he was seeing starting to hit him all at once. He thought about the years they'd spent together, the late nights, the family vacations, the quiet moments at home. And now, all of it seemed so far away. Every touch, every word she had said to him suddenly felt like a lie. Mason knew he had to confront her, but not yet, not until he had more. He needed everything, the full picture, before he could make his move. If he was going to expose her, it would have to be in a way that left no room for her to wiggle out of the truth. He grabbed his phone and sent a quick message to Dean. "This isn't enough. Keep watching her. I need every detail." There was a part of him that wanted to break things now, to end the charade and call her out. But he had to wait. He had to be patient. The more information he could gather, the more complete his evidence would be. The truth would come out, but only when he had everything. With the video still frozen on the screen, Mason leaned back in his chair, a deep, quiet sadness settling over him. The man he had been, the one who believed in the good of people, in loyalty, in love, was gone. What remained was someone who had seen the ugly side of his marriage, and now he had to deal with it. He glanced at his phone again. The messages from Dean would come through soon, but for now, there was nothing left to do but watch, wait, and prepare for the confrontation that was inevitably coming. Mason had always been methodical, precise in his work, but tonight, his focus was sharper than ever. The tiny details, things most people would overlook, were now at the forefront of his mind. He installed a GPS tracker on Celeste's car the following morning, silently working while she was in the shower. He had no intention of letting her know that he was on to her. Not yet. As he placed the tracker discreetly under the car's frame, Mason's thoughts continued to churn. He had seen Celeste's behavior shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Her sudden need for space, the odd hours she started keeping, the secretive phone calls. It all pointed to the same conclusion. She was hiding something. The tracker was the first step in what Mason was now calling his investigation. He knew he couldn't confront her just yet. He needed concrete proof before he made his next move. But as he installed the device, something in him hardened. He was no longer just a betrayed husband. He was now someone on a mission to uncover the truth. When Mason finished securing the tracker, he stood back, feeling the weight of what he was doing. It wasn't about the pain anymore. It was about getting answers. For the next few days, Mason kept up the act. He played the concerned husband, pretending nothing had changed while Celeste went about her days, unaware of the web he was slowly weaving around her. His nights, though, were spent tracking her movements, his eyes glued to his phone screen as he checked the GPS data. It wasn't long before Mason had enough information to connect the dots. One evening, Dean sent him a message. Confirmed. They've been seeing each other for months. The villa is where it all happens. I've got the dates. Mason leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen of his phone. A part of him had hoped it wouldn't be true, that it would all turn out to be some wild misunderstanding. But Dean's confirmation left no room for doubt. Celeste had been meeting Garrett in secret, and the affair had been going on far longer than Mason could have imagined. For the first time in a long time, he felt a deep, cold fury rising in his chest. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had shared everything with, had been lying to him for months. Garrett, too. The betrayal wasn't just from Celeste. It was from both of them. Mason's jaw tightened as he read through the data Dean had sent him. The villa, the times, the undeniable truth of it all. It was there, in black and white. He thought about confronting Celeste right then, but he knew he had to wait. He couldn't rush this. He had worked too hard, gathered too much information to let emotions take the lead. Number. He had to expose her, but he needed to do it in a way that left no room for manipulation or denials. The plan was forming, step by step. Mason didn't just want to confront Celeste. He wanted the world to know what she had done. Her affair couldn't be hidden anymore, and he wasn't going to let her brush it under the rug. He stood up, walking to the window. He could hear the sounds of life outside, neighbors talking, children playing. It all felt distant now, like it belonged to another world. The life he had built with Celeste was slipping away, and there was no getting it back. But in that moment, Mason felt something else. Something that had been missing for far too long. A sense of control. He wasn't the man in the dark anymore, wondering what was going on behind closed doors. Now, he was the one pulling the strings. The next steps were clear. He would wait for the right moment, gather more evidence if he could, and then he would expose Celeste for who she really was. He wouldn't let her manipulate him again. Mason looked at the phone one last time, before putting it down on the kitchen counter. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And when the time came, he would make sure Celeste and Garrett faced the consequences of their betrayal. It wasn't just about ending his marriage. It was about taking back his life. The housewarming barbecue was in full swing when Mason decided it was time to make his move. He had planned this moment down to the smallest detail. Every piece of evidence, every piece of data he had gathered was going to come to light tonight. Celeste stood by the grill, chatting with some of the neighbors, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked perfect as always, her laughter infectious, but there was something hollow about her presence. Mason could feel the weight of everything that had been building up over the past few weeks. The lies, the secret meetings, the texts he'd read, the GPS data from Dean, it was all there, undeniable, and he was done waiting. Mason waited until he caught Celeste's eye. She smiled, like everything was normal, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the quickness of her movements as she turned to face him. "I think it's time for a toast," Mason called out, raising his glass high enough for the crowd to hear. The chatter around them quieted as everyone's attention shifted to him. Celeste's eyes widened slightly, her smile faltering, but she said nothing, standing at the grill, seemingly calm. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," Mason said, his voice steady but with an edge of something colder. "It's a great feeling to have everyone here, celebrating, friends, family, good times. I've had a lot of good times, especially with my wife, Celeste." A slight shift in the crowd, a nervous glance shared among the guests. "But tonight, I think it's important to share something else with all of you," Mason continued. "Something that's been eating at me for a while now." Celeste stiffened, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. Mason could feel the weight of her gaze on him, but he didn't waver. "You see, for the last few months I've been blind to something. I've been fooled into thinking everything was fine, but I've learned that nothing is as it seems. And now, I can't keep living in the dark. So, I'm going to tell all of you something that might surprise you." Mason paused for a moment, looking around at the stunned faces of his friends and neighbors. His heart pounded, but his voice never shook. "Celeste has been seeing someone else. She's been having an affair with someone very close to me, someone I thought I could trust. His name's Garrett." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Celeste's face drained of color, her expression one of sheer panic, but she quickly masked it with a defensive smile. "Mason, this isn't the time," she started, but her words faltered as the murmur in the crowd grew louder. "I've got proof," Mason said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Photos, texts, GPS data. You've been lying to me for months, and I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." Mason pulled out his phone and showed the crowd the images he had received from Dean, the messages between Celeste and Garrett, and even the GPS data tracking their secret meetups at the villa. One by one, the faces around him went from confusion to disbelief. People exchanged looks, their eyes widening as the truth sank in. Celeste stood frozen, her face flushed, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "Mason, please, this isn't what it looks like." "Then what is it, Celeste?" Mason's voice was colder now. "You were caught, and there's no way out. I'm not letting you lie your way out of this. Not this time." Around them, the party had stopped, and all eyes were on Celeste. Her friends, her family, the neighbors. Everyone was watching her as her secret unraveled. Mason could see the shame in her eyes, but she wasn't apologizing. Instead, she was trying to control the situation, trying to salvage what was left of her carefully constructed image. "I can explain," she said, her voice breaking, but no one was listening anymore. The room was filled with the sound of whispers, disbelief, and the uncomfortable shuffling of feet. Ivy, their daughter, had appeared in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Mason's heart broke as he saw her face, pale and confused. "Dad, what's going on?" Ivy asked softly, her voice trembling. Mason's eyes softened for a moment, but he stayed focused. "Ivy, honey, come here." Ivy slowly walked to him, her eyes never leaving her mother, who stood frozen, her eyes full of fear. Mason put his arm around her, holding her close. "Sweetheart," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry you had to see this." Celeste looked at him, her defenses finally cracking. Her voice was soft, desperate. "Mason, please, don't do this." But Mason wasn't listening anymore. "You've been lying to everyone, Celeste, and now the truth is out." As the crowd began to murmur, a few guests started to back away, uncomfortable with the scene they had just witnessed. Some avoided eye contact with Celeste, while others exchanged pitying glances. Celeste's friends, those who had once been her closest allies, were slowly starting to pull away, realizing that they had been deceived. The air was thick with tension, but Mason remained resolute, holding Ivy close, knowing that his family's life was never going to be the same again. It was over. The betrayal had been exposed, and there was no going back now. Mason watched the door close behind Celeste, the soft click of the latch sounding like a finality. She had left. No confrontation, no words. Just an abrupt exit, like she was shedding the life they had built together with a simple movement of the door. It had been hours since the housewarming barbecue had shattered into chaos, since he had exposed her to their friends, to everyone, with the cold certainty of truth. The truth always had a way of coming out, no matter how many walls you put up around it. Celeste had tried to put on a brave face, but she was drowning in her lies, and Mason knew there was no coming back from that. In the wake of it all, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence was overwhelming. He had expected anger, a fight, maybe even some words from her about how he was wrong or misled. But she had left without saying a word. No tears, no pleading, just the simple finality of her leaving. Mason exhaled deeply as he sat on the couch, his hands resting on his knees. It wasn't relief he felt. It was exhaustion. Years of denial and deception had caught up to him. And now that it was over, he wasn't sure what to feel. The life he had known was gone, and in its place was something unfamiliar, something that felt like both a weight lifted and a burden left behind. He glanced at Ivy, who was sitting at the dining table, picking at her food. She had hardly spoken since everything had come out. The pain was written all over her face, in the slump of her shoulders and the dullness in her eyes. She was still processing the betrayal, the hurt of seeing her mother unravel in front of their eyes. "Ivy?" Mason's voice was soft, gentle as he stood up and walked over to her. She looked up, her eyes red from crying, but there was no anger in them, just sadness. "Dad, what happens now?" Mason sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We take it one day at a time, sweetie. We rebuild. Together." Ivy nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I don't even know what to do with all of this. I can't look at her the same way." Mason's heart broke for her. He knew how much Ivy had loved Celeste, how much she had trusted her. And now that trust had been shattered, just like his own. "I know, sweetheart, I know." The house felt quiet, the usual hum of family life, dinner, laughter, the bustle of day-to-day existence, was gone. But Mason wasn't alone. Ivy was here, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like they could face the world together. No lies, no secrets. The next few weeks were a blur. There were moments of peace, moments where Mason would sit with Ivy and talk, and there were moments of tension, where the pain of Celeste's betrayal seeped into the quiet spaces of their lives. But through it all, they kept moving forward, one step at a time. And then there was Lena, Garrett's sister. Lena had been supportive since the barbecue, offering quiet comfort to both Mason and Ivy. Slowly, she began to visit more often. It wasn't just for support anymore. It was for something deeper, something real. Lena and Mason had always been cordial, but after everything that had happened, there was a new understanding between them. Lena wasn't just a family member to Garrett anymore. She was someone Mason could confide in, someone who understood the weight of betrayal. One evening, as Lena sat at the kitchen table with Mason, sipping her tea, she spoke softly. "How are you holding up?" Mason smiled a little, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Better than I expected. Ivy's still adjusting, but we're getting there." Lena nodded, her gaze soft. "You know, I'm not going anywhere. If you need anything, I'm here." It was the kind of offer Mason hadn't expected, but it was the kind of offer he needed. He wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. Lena's visits became a fixture in their lives, a reminder that they could still build something new. It wasn't about forgetting Celeste. It was about moving forward, slowly, with the support of those who cared about him. Ivy, too, started finding her way back to herself. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this was, but she began to heal. She found solace in drawing, in art, expressing the pain she'd kept bottled up for so long. Mason was proud of her, watching as she slowly found her voice in a world that had felt so broken just months before. "I think I want to do something with this," Ivy told him one night, her eyes bright with determination. "I want to create. Art, Dad. I want to create something real." Mason smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I think that's a great idea, Ivy. Whatever you need, I'm here for you." It was in these moments, quiet, simple moments, that Mason realized the depth of what he had gained. He had lost a wife, a partner, someone he thought he'd grow old with, but in the process, he had found something even more important, his own strength and the unbreakable bond with his daughter. They had weathered the storm together. They would continue to rebuild day by day, step by step. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was theirs to walk. And for the first time in a long time, Mason felt a sense of peace, a quiet peace that he could finally build a life that was his own. Without the lies, without the betrayal. It was a new beginning, and that was enough. A week had passed since the revelation of Celeste's affair, and life had settled into a new kind of quiet. The house no longer felt like a war zone, but there was still an unmistakable weight in the air. Mason had never imagined that the woman he had once loved would leave without so much as a fight, but there it was. Her departure had been as abrupt as her betrayal. Then, one day, the mail brought a new kind of shock. Mason sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly as he read the words printed on the front. Wedding invitation, Celeste and Garrett. His mind raced. Celeste and Garrett. They were going to get married. As if the last few weeks hadn't been enough, as if the exposure of their affair hadn't been the end of it. Now they were forcing this final punch into his life, attempting to make him accept their new reality. "Dad, what's that?" Ivy's voice brought him back to the present. She had just come in from the yard, her face still glowing from the afternoon sun. Mason didn't answer right away. His gaze fixed on the invitation for a long moment. This was it, the final blow, the message that they wanted him to accept this new life they had forged in secret. He couldn't let it go, not after everything. "I don't think we need to keep this," Mason said quietly, standing up. He walked to the stove, grabbed the matchbox from the counter, and lit a small flame. Ivy watched him carefully, her eyes searching his face for meaning. She had grown quieter in the past few days, absorbing the truth of everything that had happened. Mason dropped the match onto the corner of the invitation. It caught fire quickly, the paper curling and blackening. "I'm not going back to that life," Mason muttered, watching as the flames consumed the last piece of the past. He could feel a strange sense of relief in the act, a symbolic closing of a chapter he never wanted to open. Ivy stood up and walked to his side, her hand lightly brushing his arm. "Are you okay, Dad?" Mason gave a small, tired smile. "I will be, sweetheart. I promise." Lena, who had been visiting more often lately, came into the kitchen just as the invitation finished burning. She stood silently for a moment, then spoke in a low, gentle voice. "I know that wasn't easy," she said, her eyes meeting Mason's. Mason nodded, his gaze lingering on the smoke still curling up from the ashes. "I'm done with it. I've got to be. I can't keep living in the past, Lena." Lena stepped closer, offering a quiet nod. She had been a quiet support for both Mason and Ivy, not pushing, just being there. Slowly, over the past few weeks, the connection between them had deepened. Something genuine had grown from the shared silence, the understanding of how hard things had been for both of them. "I get it," Lena replied softly, her voice warm. "It's time to let go." They stood together in the kitchen, the last remnants of Celeste's betrayal gone in the flickering embers. The silence felt comfortable now, not like the heavy silence of loss, but like the kind of silence that comes after you've made peace with what's gone and what remains. Ivy had been quiet for a while, but now she spoke up. "Mom's wedding. It's not going to be like before, is it?" Mason's heart ached at her question. "No, sweetheart, it's not. But we're going to be okay. We're starting fresh, together." The three of them shared a quiet moment in the kitchen. It wasn't a celebration, but it was something like acceptance. They were all moving forward in their own ways, and Mason realized, for the first time since everything had fallen apart, that they had the chance to rebuild. The past wasn't going to dictate their future anymore. As Lena left the kitchen, Mason turned to Ivy. "You know, if you ever need to talk about this, or anything else, I'm here. Always." Ivy nodded, her expression still sad, but more open than before. "I know, Dad. I just need time." And that was okay. Time was something they had plenty of now. Time to heal, time to grow, and time to make new memories. The house, once filled with tension and secrets, was now slowly transforming back into a home, not because of what they had lost, but because of what they were going to build. Mason looked at Ivy, his daughter, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the smallest spark of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and they would be okay. Mason sat in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows against the walls. The house was quieter now, peaceful in a way that it hadn't been in years. Ivy, who had spent the afternoon working on her art, walked into the room holding a sketchbook in her hands. Her expression was different now, softer, more focused. "Dad, look at this," she said, her voice tentative but filled with a new kind of excitement. Mason looked up, his eyes lighting up with curiosity as Ivy sat beside him on the couch. She flipped open the sketchbook to reveal a series of drawings, vivid, raw, and honest. There were landscapes, abstract images, and a self-portrait that captured the quiet strength he had come to recognize in his daughter. "These are amazing, Ivy," Mason said, his voice full of pride. He could see how far she had come, how her art had become her own personal way of processing the pain and confusion that had surrounded their lives. "You're really talented. I think you should keep going. Whatever you want to do with this, I'll support you." Ivy looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I want to create something real, something that means something. I want to make art that feels like it's mine, you know? Not just for school or anything." Mason nodded, feeling a swelling pride in his chest. This was her healing, her way of finding her voice after everything that had happened. "You've got what it takes. I've seen it." Ivy leaned against him, and for the first time in a long while, Mason felt the weight of the past months begin to lift. They were moving forward, and they would find their way. Lena had been a quiet but constant presence in their lives recently. She had offered support, a soft shoulder to lean on when it was needed most. She had become not just someone Mason could lean on, but a true friend. Their conversations had become more frequent, and Mason found himself more at ease with her company, the weight of his old life slowly shifting towards something new, something that felt right. That evening, Lena arrived with a quiet knock on the door, carrying a simple dinner. "Thought I'd bring something by for all of us," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of understanding. Mason smiled, a genuine smile, the kind that had been buried under the weight of the past. "Thanks, Lena. You don't know how much this means." Ivy, sensing the change in her father's tone, stood up. "I'm going to finish that sketch, Dad. I'll be in my room if you need me." The two adults shared a look, an unspoken understanding between them, as Ivy retreated to her room. Lena set the dinner on the table, and they both sat down, the quiet comfort of shared meals and companionship filling the space. "How's Ivy doing?" Lena asked, her voice soft. "Better. She's finding her way," Mason replied, his voice reflecting a quiet hope. "She's getting stronger every day." Lena smiled, her gaze lingering on Mason for a moment before she spoke again. "And what about you? How are you holding up?" Mason took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "It's been a lot, but I'm starting to feel like we're actually going to be okay. Not just surviving, but really living again. It's not going to happen overnight, but we'll get there." Lena nodded, her eyes meeting his with a gentle understanding. "You've been through hell, Mason, but you've made it out. And so has Ivy." They ate together, the soft conversation drifting between them, and Mason realized that this was the beginning of something new. Not just for him, but for Ivy as well. They had walked through the storm of betrayal and loss, and now they were stepping into the light. Later that evening, as Ivy emerged from her room with another sketch in hand, Mason looked at her with a new sense of awe. She was no longer the girl he had seen so lost in her confusion, but someone who was carving out her own future, and Mason was proud of her for it. He didn't know exactly what the future would look like, but for the first time in a long while, he was excited about it. The darkness of the past had faded, leaving only the light of the present and the promise of tomorrow. With Lena's friendship and Ivy's determination, Mason knew they could build something real, something lasting. And though the past would never be fully forgotten, they were slowly learning to leave it behind, to embrace the new chapter they were writing for themselves. As they finished dinner and the night settled around them, Mason felt at peace. They had survived, and now they were ready to thrive. In the quiet of the evening, Mason smiled to himself, knowing that while the scars of the past would always be there, they would not define him. He had Ivy, he had Lena, and most importantly, he had himself again. For the first time in years, Mason felt like he could finally breathe.